welcome to Get the Bag, Business Assets and Gains, where we talk to local businesses about their journeys, their challenges, and their successes. I'm Carmen Davenport, founder of Black Dollar Indie, and today we have here with us founder and managing attorney of Gracious Estate Law, Veronique Bowie.
Briscoe Bowie.
Briscoe Bowie,
Yes.
Esquire.
Yes.
Let me not forget. I didn't want to forget that.
Yes.
I didn't want to
I'm
forget
just
that.
allowing myself to like really be comfortable with that banner because there's so many ideas around like what it means to be a lawyer and like really what I've been and what I hope to be as an advocate. So sometimes it's like, oh, if you're a lawyer, like, but I'm like, what if I just am a lawyer? So because I did the work.
Wow.
So working through that.
Is that uncomfortable? Is that?
I think because I think it's something like 1% of attorneys are Black or something like that. So there's already that, which is always the thing that you're like proud of, but there's also like there's tensions always there, right? Because if your goal is to be accessible or to create access, if you are one of few, that can sometimes create separation. So like do everyday people feel like they know an attorney just like they grew up with, this is a casual person every day. So it's sort of like I think that I've always loved besting myself. So I think, yes, in that way, I love the fact that I took that journey, though I didn't plan it necessarily. But if it separates me from people, and people feel like that there's more of a wall between me than what would be anyway, then that makes it kind of hard. You know what I mean? A little bit harder. Because that's the whole goal of it, right? Is to make sure that people have the tools they need to do what they want with their lives. And,
Yeah. And then that comfortability has to exist, right? So, I mean,
it should exist. But sometimes we've kind of like taught ourselves, like, I mean, this is kind of one of the challenges of all the ways in which we're socialized, but sometimes we feel like that there has to be a distance, like if there's someone you're working with that's very educated or whatever else, that you should, the way is respect is that they're kind of a little bit removed from you versus like, what does it mean to have someone that, yeah, they've done this work, but they also are trying to meet you where you are and they want you to be able to meet them where they are. And yeah, there doesn't have to be so much between us.
We talk about the pyramid, right? We don't want to. You're talking about not getting stuck on. You're right here on the pyramid, and I'm right here on the pyramid, and then there's all these things in between that make me go, I don't know if I'm good enough to be in your space, right?
And sometimes we look for that, right? So we just look for that because that's like a way we affirm that, oh, like this person's going to know what they're doing, and those are things that we've been socialized, I think, just as marginalized people to like kind of sometimes think that way, whether it's intentional or not. It's like you don't want to be with someone that's stuffy, but then at the same time, like that must mean they're really, if they're kind of cold and aloof, maybe they're really good for what they do. It's like, it's a little bit of probably like some sort of weird attachment theory or something. I don't know what it is, but yeah. So that's just me. But I kind of decided I became a lawyer for some very specific reasons, and then I think I've been able to do many things that have addressed those reasons. But then I started coming along the way. It's like, yeah, but like, what if I'm just a lawyer? Like, what if that's the way that I do the thing that I'm intending to do? So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to step back just a second, and because I always like to ask who the person is behind the product or service. And so I want to know all the things that you do, but I also want to know who Veronique is. So who is Veronique?
I grew up in theater.
Wow.
I am one of the founding original members of Asante Children's Theater, which is now the Asante Art Institute, and I'm currently serving as their interim executive director. But I'm one of the very first, and so I grew up in that tradition. I always say my mother being really thoughtful about me being exposed to history, culture, and community saved my life because I went to predominantly white private schools all the way through, and it's what I think has allowed me to be sane, but also centered in like who I am and what I'm intended for. So I think that's very true. But I think I struggled with this idea that I'm like the academic, but I'm also in these creative spaces. What does that mean? But I also was a creative, and I am a creative. And so maybe 10 years ago, so I started realizing that I'm a thought artist. And so I'm a really incredible problem solver. And that's what I've spent my life doing, whether it be the kids in my neighborhood, trying to figure out how they get access to the same support that I'm getting for the PSAT, or whether it's serving kids with special education needs, or any other thing that I've done, tax attorney, anything I've done, right? I've always been solving problems, but also looking for the ways that people show up within the rules, right? And how do we help people be able to navigate rules? So the more creative you are, it's sort of like the more creative you are and more attuned you are to how you navigate and survive rules, because I grew up within rules. I think the more, I don't know, the more hopeful you can be, or I like to say hope is like strategy, not just blind optimism. So the more strategic you could be, right? So that's what I would base. I would always call myself that I'm a thought artist. But yeah, I've done a lot of different work. I would say youth development first, kids first. I really thought always that education was the way. So I spent most of my time trying to figure out how do I create a bigger impact through education, and which is kind of what led me to law school. But I didn't know what education lawyer was because I never saw one. And I came out of law school and ended up being a tax attorney for the Christian Legal Clinic, but loved tax law because it actually is about people, and did their immigrant outreach education program because I'm Spanish speaking. And so I developed and ran that program for 4 years. Got to raise my daughter as part-time because I worked part-time. So I got to be at home with her till she was 5, so which was awesome. And still was looking to get an education. So I got to go to DOE finally, and worked in special education law, and had special project around disproportionality, which is the over-identification of certain racial subgroups for special ed, expulsion, things like that. So I did work with schools and districts and all that kind of good stuff. So the journey is circuitous. But I think the big part of that journey that's important, I spent like the last about 8 years or so in a national education consulting firm designing deep learning to kind of help people who say, I mean, we all nonprofit people feel like, you're good, right? Because you're like sacrificing yourself to the nonprofit. But I think good is a practice, right? And so like, how do we help people who feel really good about themselves ensure that their practice aligns with that, and the policies and the other things that they're doing is actually getting the results? So I spent the last 8 years doing that with folks from Hawaii to Puerto Rico.
Oh, wow.
But I really thought back to like when I first came home from law school, and my grandmother basically was like, young attorney Veronique, you do wills, because we need wills, and like whoever, you need wills. And so I would do this stuff because I think, as a journalist attorney, you sort of like take an order, right? You want a will, I'll give you a will, so you need a will. Also because you do what my grandmother says. And so I did that. But it's like, because I believe I have a guided life, it's kind of all aligned where I realize that yes, education has provided me with choice and opportunity, but it was my grandfather's very intentional planning that actually created the foundation for which I could choose what school I wanted to go to.
Wow.
I could never worry about whether or not, was I going to have tuition, if my mother was short or my father was short, like where were things going to come from? Because all of his children had their own homes. Like, where would I sleep right now if I couldn't make anything work in my life? I have a home to go to, right? And so really understanding on this equity journey that we have to understand that education is important, but without that foundational piece, which is what many more sort of like privileged communities have, then you really set your kids up to constantly be starting over. Wow. And also you lose values in that. And since I'm a very value-centered person, I don't do work that doesn't align with my value. Or I've been fortunate, again, another thing, if my grandfather hadn't set things up in this way, would I've always gotten to choose to live in my values? And I have. And so we can't expect people who are struggling or surviving to be able to live into their values, right? There's a lot of risk to that. So how can we make our hard work true? So that's kind of like a little bit of the journey from there to there, and that I'm always thinking about how can I be of use? And it just became clear to me that the circle, like the goal all along, was for me to align these things.
Okay. So you studied tax law.
Oh, I was a tax attorney.
Tax attorney, and then family law.
I did. So when I was a tax attorney, I was part-time at the Christian Legal Clinic, and I had a small family law practice. But then I went to the Department of Education and did special education law. So I did that for probably 3 or 4 years. And then I spent 8 years doing that other broader work.
Right.
Yeah.
So what made you decide this is what I want to do? I want to do estate planning.
Yeah.
I want to, what led you to make that specific
I
decision?
think I had this calling me because I was always a person, as far as like when we get to like the business owner part, like I grew up with an entrepreneur father. I was like, I just want to know when my check's gonna come. I don't I don't want to do that. I never wanted to do that. I mean, I always felt like sort of against it. And then I just start getting that sort of, I don't know, it's the whispering, it's the push, right? To say like, this is the thing that you can do, and it's the thing that you can do that is serving. Because whatever I do must be a service, like to others, I guess is just how my life has been, and it's what I want to do with my life. And so I think, again, for me, the point was just is that I thought it was one thing, and I do think the work that I've done around education is important, and it still is important and necessary, but without the other, it does or does not matter. That's where you start getting to exceptions to the rule, right? Like, you know, if so many of us make it because we got the education that we needed, great. But we could make it, you know, 90%, you know, if we can also have that foundation. And I think also I want to push against the illusion that our communities haven't been doing hard work. A lot of the hard work that we've done has gotten lost because we haven't had access to legal tools to kind of concretize that or fortify it. So it allows that story about like, you know, people are just making it, they never had anything. It's like, no, like somebody worked hard. You know?
Absolutely.
And then it got lost. Somebody, like your grandmother gave her your house, but you couldn't pay the property taxes. And then all of a sudden that place that was like a home to you got bought, and then you had to move on. And now it's like you're displaced, and it's like, oh, it never existed, but somebody worked hard.
They did.
And so I really also feel that's important for folks who haven't been fortunate enough to have my experience, to be able to create those experiences for the people that are in their lives, right? Or the people that are to come after them. And that we have to realize that we deserve that. Like we deserve to understand that we are legacies, that we create legacies. We don't just come from legacies. For me, to the point of my life, just really feeling guided, it's just like, oh, these are two sides of a coin. You cannot have one without the other. And the data shows it, that you can be very, very wealthy and your kid can return to poverty based on these, you know, sort of social identities around race and gender and things like that.
It happened to my dad, where my grandmother passed, house was paid off, she left it to the kids, somebody didn't pay the taxes, house is gone, right? And so that happens to a lot of us, right? And so how do we avoid that? Because I think even for me, I have a house and I'm like, oh, I'll just put it in my daughter's name, right?
Don't do that.
And I think that is because we, like you said, the legal tools, right? Having someone that comes in and says, I can educate you on this. And you, like, there's things that you can do to prevent certain things from happening. And that's one of them. So what should people do? Besides come make sure you visit Veronique.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I definitely believe education first, right? So learn about your options, right? Because what one person says or another person says, I mean, isn't really how you get at what you need. It's really kind of like having access to the information. And I believe that we are capable of making good decisions for ourselves when we have access for the information. So any work I do is education first. And then from the education and your unique situation, like these are options that you might want to pursue, right? Because you'll know what's best for you and you know your people, right? And so you kind of know what their limits are. And so I would say, you know, when you start thinking about things about like property, for example, yeah, there are things like transfer on death deed. I would be cautious about putting, you know, without, this is not legal advice. This is education. But
did you look at the camera?
Yeah, I did. On accident. That was my sitcom moment. It was totally accidental. But yeah, all that said, you want to be careful about just deeding your properties to people as a way of passing them over for a number of reasons, which might be unique to you. But one thing is you want to understand that they won't have the same basis. That's kind of like a tax term. So whatever they bought that property for, whatever you bought the property for will not be the value that's assigned to whoever you grant the property to. And so if there's been any gain in between that time. So if you bought the property for $50,000 and now it's $100,000, there's a $50,000 gain that could be taxed, right? And so again, we don't want our gifts to be burdens to people. And so that's one thing out of many. So there's things like transfer on death deeds, which keep things out of probate, but doesn't require you to have like a trust, a revocable trust or anything like that. But then there's still reasons why you might not want to do that. So because you're thinking about, there's a lot of different factors you're thinking about. But I would say that those are some of the things, is thinking about how do I designate things through beneficiaries like life insurance policies, retirement accounts, transfer on deaths, or payable on deaths for your checking account. Those are all some ways to avoid it without making the investment of doing estate planning documents. But again, you still would want to talk with an attorney to figure out what actually is in the best interest of you and your family, because there's unique things that might mean you're going to end up paying more, or your family member is going to end up paying more on the back end because of a decision you made today. So we get really scared of cost of things and et cetera, without really understanding like sometimes the long-term cost or impact of something that we do. And I know that people don't want to burden their families. Again, even like with grandma's property, okay, grandma's going to give somebody the property. Either she's going to split it too many ways, right? And so then you're going to have disagreement, right? Or grandma gets the property, there's property taxes, or nowadays maybe a mortgage on it still. How does it get paid, right? And so there's actually maybe some ways to plan for that. Maybe there's a life insurance policy that goes into a revocable trust, and it's meant to provide for the maintenance and support of the property for a certain period of time. You know, there's just, it could be a number of things that could be different, but it's just like assuming that folks can take on these challenges and then also not feel tremendous guilt or distress when they can't handle that. It's just another trauma that we can avoid.
Right. I think that a lot of people feel like you have to be wealthy, right, to even talk to an estate attorney. And you mentioned wills. Should we all have a will? And when should I think about trust?
So I would like to encourage us to reimagine wealth. So, you know, and so that is another reason to talk with a estate planning attorney to try to think through, like, again, we sometimes have misperceptions about what is wealth. If you own a home, most people that own a home, that means that their estate is worth over $100,000. And so if your estate is worth over $100,000 and you have no will, all your items are going to pass intestate, which means without a will, and it has to go through the court because you can't sign off on anything if you're not living.
Right.
Or if you're incapacitated, like you have any kind of mental condition or anything like that, you can't sign off on anything. It has to go through a court, which has costs associated with it, right? There may be a reason why, even if you have a smaller estate, you still don't want, you still don't want that to happen.
Right.
You don't want someone else to make those decisions for you. So you can choose to make the decisions for yourself. But again, I wouldn't want you to be afraid of that option. It's just that you need to know what the impact of that choice is, because doing nothing is a choice. And so there's impact there. And so really a will, I would say, is generally bare minimal if you want to have a voice in sort of like what happens to your hard work. And especially if you have children, because that's where guardianship, you could state guardianship, permanent guardianship, specifically. You could have a separate document for temporary, but specifically permanent guardianships, those sort of things, you would want to make sure that, your kids aren't going through more trauma or distress because we have to figure out, do they go to this grandparents or this grandparents or this sister or that sister, because you can make those decisions for yourself because you know your people again. So it's really about getting over this fear that because I talk about it or think about it, it's going to happen. And also to understand, like, avoidance doesn't remove the fact that we all are on a kind of like from now to when. So I would just say that the will is kind of like roughly a bare minimum if that feels like that's the right thing to do for you. Again, for some people, they're okay with the court making those decisions, and having a will still requires a judge because they still has to go through probate. It's just that the judge then can approve the things that were stated in the will, and they can also find out for sure if that will is actually your will, right? And not someone else's, something else someone else created. So I would just say a trust. I mean, there's many different reasons why someone might want to use a trust. A trust, again, kind of extends your hand beyond the grave, right? In the sense that the trust can continue to sign off on the instructions that you've created versus needing the judge to do so. So that's usually kind of how I think about it. And so really, again, I think it's like one-to-one, but I don't, it depends on what you have and what your needs are and what your goals are. And I feel like starting estate planning isn't the end of the journey because it's really a snapshot in time, right? So like if I say I need to start an estate plan right now with what I have right now, well, me right now is not who I'm going to be 20 years from now, right? So to me, it's actually kind of also exciting because I can say I'm going to leave this legacy for my child, right? Or for whatever charities I believe in, whatever else. And so I now have this kind of vehicle to do that. And so I can actually plan with that in mind and like be excited about like what kind of legacy I'm going to build. It doesn't have to be like all, you know, gloom and doom. It could really be like, wow, like I've crafted this whole thing that's going to set these people up moving forward. And like, how am I going to, you know, how am I going to create an asset here or how am I going to do this there? You know, and what does that mean? And how does that fit within the structure of this plan? You know, and that could be, I think, exciting to imagine that your child or your grandchild may not have to start from zero.
Yeah, and I think we have to really, you know, you think about history, right, and how things have been passed down. We talk about generational wealth, which, you know, generational wealth, we talk about traits, we talk about all the things that can be passed down. And a lot of times we don't think past 2 generations, right? And so it's like all I can imagine in my head is a flow chart that I'm probably not capable of completely thinking through, which I think that's the importance of going to an estate attorney that can say, okay, well, what about, you know, you have one daughter. What if, what's going to happen if she doesn't have kids?
Right.
And, you know, that type of thing. Questions that I probably wouldn't have thought of past.
Or we don't want to think of.
Or you don't want to think about it. Yeah. So, so I think that's, you know, again, when you were talking, I was putting this flow chart together in my head, and I'm like, oh, you know what? That's why an attorney is important, because I couldn't get past, well, what if she doesn't have kids? Then what? Then what do I do? You know, so I have a couple of questions on here that I want to read off. I've heard you talking about letting everyday people take control of their legacy. Why do you believe that legacy matters for everyone and not just the wealthy?
Yeah. Well, I am a product of legacy, and so I know it matters, right? And again, I think stability adds to that, right? But I feel like I know like my third great grandma because I get to hear stories from my 93-year-old grandmother, right, about her grandmother, and about where they were from. And you know, I got to sit at the knee of my great grandmother, and I got to hear about these people as though they were present in my lives, and like that their choices and their actions led me to this moment, right? And so I think it's not exactly obligation that I would call it, but knowing who you are and what you come from does sort of center you in the world differently, right? And those folks could not have dreamed of like what I have done. I mean, actually, I think maybe they tried, right? I think that they maybe tried to imagine what was possible for me from the time that they lived in, because they made choices like deciding to come to Indianapolis and like, you know, scraping together funds to buy a duplex. And like they did all of these things, right? To, you know, 3 generations or more back to create these opportunities. And so I think legacy matters for everyday people because we get to have dreams. You know, we get to have dreams, and those dreams might be through our children, but they don't have to be, right? I think, and that we are powerful people. Like everyday people are very powerful. We make a difference. We matter. And again, I think that we don't always understand that we are legacy building every day. There's someone who, I always say, like, you know, there's some people that you might only be like a good person to, right? Or like there's some man that's like only a good man, right? But to someone else, you know, that's a great man, right? And so it's like there's somebody who's looking at you or who's engaged with you who you made this tremendous difference for. There's somebody who you might make a tremendous difference for with something very small, right? That you don't think anything else of. And that difference could leads to a legacy, right? And so just really living in our own skin differently and really deciding that we get to plan beyond this moment. Living in this moment is survival mode. And we have opportunity to say, yes, I know the world wants me to live in survival mode, but I'm going to say I'm going to survive past this moment. You know what I mean? And I'm going to say that my line is going to survive past this moment. and that they deserve to have some softness. So I always say that like people were going crazy about like the Ralph Lauren and the Inkwell and all that stuff ads is like those people held on, like the reason why those people are having that experience or people can take trips and have that experience is because somebody did some work
Yeah.
to keep that in their families.
Wow.
Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's important that we just need to be okay with that. And that is some mindset work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking ahead, what is the one bold hope or dream you have for Gracious Estate Law? Something that maybe you haven't done yet.
What I would say is that one of the ways that marginalized communities build and control wealth and their income is through business ownership, business development, right? It is also through our artistry, right? We talked about creatives and business owners being aligned in the way in which they're visionaries. And so with that said, a lot of times folks don't think about their business as their baby. Like, so I always say when I had my daughter, I thought, what kind of person do I want her to become? And so I've been putting all these deposits into that, hoping that might come out, right? True. I'm not just worried about how she was when she was like, 0 to 5, right? I kept on putting deposits in. And so sometimes with business, we're kind of like thinking about like our baby, business is a baby, like, like right now I just got to get it going, I got to get it going. But really we can lean into this idea that what happens if I retire? Like, what does it mean to retire from a business, right? Do I have to work till I die in the business? Like, is that what owning a business means? What does it mean to have a succession plan for our business? What does it mean to have buy-sell agreements? Because I'm going to create value in my business so that my family can benefit from that if I'm disabled or if I pass away. And so really helping people kind of understand how that connects to estate planning, and that's actually being good business owners. But kind of a piece of that is helping more business owners have access to attorneys. So my kind of like dream, I think right now, is figuring out how to create a subscription service so that folks who maybe feel a little bit overwhelmed by the investment of having an attorney could still have access to like a real person versus just like, some kind of corporation out there, but someone that they can actually have some at different levels based on kind of where they are.
Right. I like that.
So that's like a dream for next year. Hopefully January, February, I'll have figured it out.
That's a really close dream. Like that's beyond a dream now. I kind of feel like that's something that's in the works. It is in the works. Okay. Just to make sure that everybody out there understands all the services that you offer, all the things that they can come to you for. Tell everybody your business name, your social media handles, and all the services that you can provide to the community. My name is Veronique Briscoe-Bowie. I am with Gracious Estate Law. I practice estate planning, so that means wills, trust, the 3 essential documents every adult needs to have, which is a power of attorney, advanced healthcare directives, and living will. So I primarily work in the area of making sure that individuals and families are able to kind of control what happens to their hard work. And I also want to continue to extend that work to business owners, real estate investors, folks who are building wealth, but to make sure that wealth is secured. You can find me at graciousestatelaw.com. You could also just go ahead and sign up for a consultation if you want to learn more about your unique situation. Thank you so much. And there's one last question I always like to ask is, what's in your bag? What is your biggest asset or gain to date? My ability to see beyond any moment in front of me. My daughter said that I've taught her that there's always more. No matter what kind of roadblock you come into in life, there's always more. And I think that is the biggest asset that I've been gifted and that I hope to model for others. I love that. Well, you guys have heard it here. Make sure that you follow Veronique Bowie at Gracious Estate Law. And this is Carmen Davenport from Black Dollar Indie. Again, you have tuned in to Get the Bag, Business Assets and Gains. Just remember, tune in next time so we can talk about what's in your bag.